A car under 200,000 Rand is also a good deal. We saw a surge in that category by 20%. And this was over and above the normal trends that we saw in those particular price categories. Another surprising trend was we saw a 10-fold increase when lockdown level 1 hit in searches for armored vehicles. Today, we're going to try and answer the question, is South Africa ready for future mobility? But I think there's one thing we can all agree on, and that is it is mobility unusual. And with the 2020 coronavirus and lockdown, it's certainly been an unusual year. And what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on the differences between 2020 and 2019, but specifically how the industry has been impacted by lockdown levels 4 and 5 and so on. And then how the industry has recovered with the trading commencing on the 31st of October under lockdown level 3. Because if the automotive retail industry wasn't successful and rebounded to the unprecedented times we find ourselves in, we wouldn't have adapted as quickly as we have. And in AutoTrader, data is the roadmap to the future. And while we can't predict the future, I used to believe that we could plan for it. And if this was a year ago, I would definitely say that I would have bought into that statement. You can plan for the future. Well, while you could still probably plan for the future, we could never have planned for the global pandemic. It hit us hard. And in an uncertain future, this thing crept in, and big companies like Edcon, Comair, and even many print publications in South Africa almost or did see their demise. And this is testament to the fact that the future is definitely uncertain. Now, as we stand here talking about the future of mobility, we see that COVID-19 and the pandemic, especially the national lockdown, has caused a fundamental change and the shift in consumer shopping behavior. And this is what we're mostly going to be talking about today. Although dealers started trading roughly about the middle of May 2020, today we're going to focus on June 2020 to October 2020, which is the start of the full trading month of June for automotive retailers. And we're going to compare that to 2019. And essentially comparing the industry's rebound period to when life was normal back in 2019. But I think it was changing anyway. As much as COVID-19 has been a focus of 2020, it would be wise of us as an industry to take an even bigger step back and accept that our industry was changing nonetheless, arguably faster than it ever has before. The next wave of real change can be boiled down to just 2 words, and those 2 words are electric vehicles. In my opinion, this is a good and a necessary change. A shift away from the dirty fuel to the greener, cleaner, and more sustainable planet that we all want to live on. And keeping a close eye on the data will help ensure this shift and ensure that it has a positive impact on our local automotive industry rather than a disruptive one. More about EVs a little bit later, but talking about data, AutoTrader is fortunate enough to operate at scale across all demographics and all provinces in South Africa. And we measure absolutely everything. Data has become our lifeblood, and we're committed to helping the South African automotive industry use data to its advantage. So, let me take you and walk you through this roller coaster year that was 2020 and unveil some consumer insights based on the data. Looking in the rearview mirror, I think we've managed to avoid a head-on collision. It might be an oxymoron, but we came close to a train smash. We lobbied government together, we communicated to dealers and customers in the industry. Doors opened just in time because the South African people still needed cars for various reasons and needed to trade cars for various reasons. Essentially, we've discovered that there are two driving forces. The data arguably shows this, and we should take note of this in 2020. And those two driving forces are, firstly, the macroeconomic factors, and then secondly, the shift in the consumer mindset. Let's focus for a second on the macroeconomic factors. Even before lockdown, we were predicting about a 5% decline in the market. We saw a 2.8% decline from 2018 into 2019. And our dear friend Mike Mabasa has said many, many times, we also need to stop the reliance on the global supply chains because only 39% of our components are made here. On top of all of this, increasing new car prices has been bad for new car sales and used car retailers and the economy. Just to look at the declines. We need to change this because used car buoyancy as it is at the moment is not sustainable. I've always said that used car is fed by new car. So new car buoyancy is absolutely vital to South Africa's future. But then what happened? On the 5th of March, South Africa recorded its first case of COVID-19. A dark time indeed for the South African automotive industry. But looking internally at AutoTrader's own data, no one could have predicted what would come next. And before I move on to that story, I recall one Saturday morning, lockdown had just happened, and we didn't know what the future held. And I sat back in my home thinking about a bleak next couple of months. But then I looked at the data within AutoTrader. I started looking at the data and I saw something interesting, which I'm going to share with you in a few minutes. And it gave me the drive to pick up the phone and call Mike and say to him, what are we doing about this? Our industry can't be closed for the remainder of this year. And so the rest is history. We lobbied to government alongside NAMSA, and you will know that automotive retail opened up. So moving back onto what would come next. And this is a pronounced consumer mind shift. But the most important thing is that what we noticed is that it was almost immediate. Because the low point of site visits, which is the first thing to point out, the low point of search and conversion into inquiries to customers wasn't actually during lockdown. It was on the day before lockdown, on the 26th of March, where our single day traffic search and conversion declined by 45% year on year. We lost almost half of the search traffic that we had gained over the years in AutoTrader. And we can only assume that people were out panic buying essential goods. But on a positive note, and rather surprisingly, and the reason I told you the story about me ringing up Mike to ask what are we doing about this, and even though the automotive retail industry was under a forced national shutdown, consumer searches started to rise. From the very next day after lockdown, on the first day of lockdown, we started to see the trend, and they increased every single day thereafter. And looking at data outside AutoTrader to try and corroborate the trends that we were seeing, and this data is from Google, the exact same picture emerged. The very similar consumer interest trends started to show up. And consumers were searching for used cars for various reasons. And we're going to get into those reasons in a second. So alongside the industry bodies, like NAMSA, we applied collective pressure to the Department of Trade and Industry to relax hard lockdown on the automotive industry. And we also took a firm decision not to bill our customers at AutoTrader, and we called on the rest of the industry to save the automotive retail part of our industry. So without lobbying the government, and together, we may have opened manufacture, but not retail. Soon enough, perhaps not to avoid doom or a catastrophe. But that didn't happen because consumers were voting with their mice or mouses, not sure which one you call it, with their phones and their thumbs and with their tablets, to be able to ease their financial pressures and burdens by trading cars. So let's get back to the two driving forces, particularly the second one, a shift in the consumer mindset. Consumers, as I said, reacted immediately, but they reacted in unpredictable ways. And these are the things that make me think that the future is not as plannable as we sometimes think it is. Some of the data I've extracted to put into this presentation, but the first one is immediately consumers almost became insomniacs. We saw a 20% rise in traffic search and conversion between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning. If we narrowed that to between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning, we saw a 78% rise in search, traffic, and conversion. Who's awake searching for cars between 1 and 2 in the morning? Not only that, searches at midnight far surpassed searches at 9 a.m. on a normal day. We also saw a buying down trend where we saw a surge of under 50,000 Rand vehicles by about 15% and a surge of under 100,000 Rand vehicles by 29%. And like anybody can tell you, a car under 200,000 Rand is also a good deal. We saw a surge in that category by 20%. And this was over and above the normal trends that we saw in those particular price categories. Another surprising trend was we saw a 10-fold increase when lockdown level 1 hit in searches for armored vehicles. This was only in lockdown level 1. Possibly due to the crime. Maybe during the lockdown there was little crime and then suddenly criminals became more active during lockdown level 1. So we saw a 10-fold increase in armored vehicle searches from before lockdown, which was March, to lockdown level 1. And while I can give you many, many insights like this into the data and extract it, what's more important though is another consumer shift, or should I say another possible consumer shift. And that is the shift to personal mobility. Now on the screen what you're seeing is a Google trend chart. This isn't AutoTrader's data, this is a Google trend chart. And what we've done is we've used AutoTrader as a proxy for the search for vehicles or cars. And we've used the term Uber as a proxy for shared mobility, getting a taxi. And you can see that almost at lockdown, the appetite for shared mobility dropped through the floor. And the appetite for personal mobility started to rise, to the point where one now exceeds the other. Personal mobility exceeds shared mobility in this particular example. And before you think I've lost the plot, due to this highly contagious nature of this virus, South Africans were forced to make unprecedented changes to the way in which they lived and still live. Personal hygiene and general cleanliness of everyday environments, including how we get around, are now top of mind for every single consumer in South Africa. So shared mobility doesn't quite have the same appeal anymore. One doesn't know who sat in the same seat before you when you climb into that ride share. So personal mobility is the only surefire way of knowing that your mobility environment is 100% safe. And I think this paints a really good picture. So getting back to the shift in the consumer mindset, as much as COVID-19 and the pandemic may perhaps have made South Africans prefer personal mobility over shared mobility, it's not something we can rest our laurels on. A viable vaccine could change all that. And everybody knows over the last 2 or 3 days what Pfizer came out with. And the next wave of consumer change is therefore around the corner. And that is what I spoke about earlier on, the era of EVs. What this significant change will mean to the local automotive industry as a result could be to our benefit or could be to our disruption. And those things are the initial investment. The initial investment to adopt EVs becomes unrealistic in terms of implementation the closer we get to Europe not accepting ICE vehicles. We have the trickle-down effect, which is the second-hand ICE car market will thrive right now, but in the future it'll get older and older and older if we don't adopt EVs, because we won't be able to get our hands on any ICE vehicles post about 2035, maybe 2040. New car exports will suffer because Europe won't accept our exports anymore. All as a result of a global ban on ICE vehicles. So while different countries in Europe have different drop-dead dates, it's roughly around 2035, where the EU won't accept ICE vehicles from South Africa any longer. So in saying that, we decided to put together a study. We called it the Eevee Buyers Survey in conjunction with eMobility, and we discovered a couple of things. One of those things I was surprised at was that South Africans really want EVs. According to our research, we saw that 68% of consumers say they want to buy an EV within the next 3 to 5 years. And if you want to download a full copy of the report, because I won't be able to unpack everything here, go to reports.autotrader.co.za and you can download a full copy of the Eevee Buyers Survey. South Africans are also searching on AutoTrader more for EVs than they ever have. But not only are they searching for EVs, they're searching for EVs that don't exist in our market, like a Toyota Hilux. And 38% of respondents aged 35 to 54 are looking to buy an EV in the next 3 years. 3 years is around the corner. And the age bracket of 35 to 54 is squarely in the age bracket of people that have the financial means to buy an EV. But there's a couple of caveats that we're coming to. One of the concerns by consumers, or one of the negatives by consumers, is that South Africa lacks charging infrastructure, and that's a charging infrastructure nationally. But consumers don't know that there are charge points within 100 to 200 kilometers of each other on almost every major highway. And within South African metros of Joburg, Durban and Cape Town, you don't have to travel more than about 20 kilometers before reaching a charging station. Not only that, the experts will tell you that we have one charging station for every 4 EVs, compared to one charging station for every 20 EVs internationally. So from a charging infrastructure point of view, not necessarily from a charge capacity or delivery point of view, we're ahead of the adoption curve from an infrastructure perspective. So the problem currently isn't charging infrastructure, it's education and EV adoption. And in order to do that, and to successfully get across this line, we need government involvement. We need to work with government to reduce the import taxes, as you've seen NAAMSA lobby for. We need to potentially do some other stuff. Everybody looks at the Norway example. What did they do in Norway? They reduced company car taxes. They reduced toll taxes. They reduced parking fees for EVs. And countries such as Norway are a good template. These tax reductions don't have to last forever. And we can learn a lot from Norway as a country. Currently in South Africa, it's the opposite. Import taxes are higher on EVs at 25% plus than they are on ICE vehicles. And so government involvement is crucial for the EV future and automotive industry in South Africa. But not only government involvement, the other thing that is crucial is consumer lifestyle changes. And whilst we need to work with the government on building legislation and taxes, consumers also need to understand how simple the lifestyle change is. I like to use an analogy that we're going to go back to the era of riding horses. And you might think I've gone loopy, but if you cast your mind back, none of us are old enough to cast our mind back, you wouldn't destination feed your horse. You would feed your horse overnight at home. So the world of destination filling an Eevee is part of what the simple lifestyle change to a consumer's world needs to be. And then the question is, how fast will South Africa and the rest of Africa for that matter take to adopt EVs? Another concern of consumers is home charging. The perception of consumers is that it takes about 4 hours to charge an EV. But when it comes to buying an EV, the curve shifts to the left, as you see on the screen. Almost all consumers, 91% in fact, believe that EVs should be able to fully charge at their home in less than 12 hours. That is a possibility. The Jaguar I-Pace can pretty much do that. 73.7% of consumers want EVs to take less than 4 hours to charge at home. That's an impossibility right now, as the technology stands. But you don't need to charge EVs in 4 hours if you just have the lifestyle change. And remember the horse analogy. Plug your car in like you would plug your mobile phone in when you get home. Consumers also have a concern over public fast charging. 74% of the respondents in the survey believe that EVs should fully charge in under 1 hour at public fast charging stations. And 45% want EVs to take less than 30 minutes to charge at a fast charging station. But in order to buy an EV, which is the critical thing, besides the perception, consumers want their EVs to charge in less than 30 minutes at a fast charging station. So it's a public education job that we have to do, and getting involved with government, as we said before, to try and lower the taxes on EVs. Another concern of consumers is range anxiety. Everybody has spoken about range anxiety. I experienced range anxiety the other day. 45.9% of respondents in the survey believe that the average EV delivers up to 300 kilometers on a single charge. That is accurate. But most consumers, when wanting to buy an EV, want the car to have a range of at least 500 kilometers. So what does the perfect EV look like for South African adoption? Well, it is a car that costs under 500,000 Rand, according to the EV buyer survey, has a 500 kilometer range, that's a big tick, does full home charging in under 12 hours, that's a possibility, has full public charging in under 30 minutes. That's a consumer education piece. So I think this is a very high possibility if we just band together and make it happen. In terms of which brands are most on top of consumers' minds, BMW wins out, just like BMW wins out on searches on AutoTrader. But if you look at the chart in terms of brand awareness, now this question was, which brands have EVs on South African roads today? You will notice that brands like Toyota are on the list, and there are no EVs in South Africa. Again, a consumer education or marketing job that we need to do as an industry. When it comes to brands that consumers trust to manufacture EVs, the picture changes slightly. While BMW still wins out as the brand most trusted by consumers to manufacture EVs, surprisingly, an EV that is not in South Africa, which is the Tesla, comes second. And you can see all of our loved brands on that list. So there is evidence that South Africa is ready to adopt EVs. The question is, do you think South Africa is ready? I think we are. But what is your role going to be? And what role are you going to play in bridging this gap? As an OEM, as government officials, as consumers, as dealers, and as a society and a continent to ensure that we retain our automotive industry. Because guess what? It's ours to lose. So you can go to reports.autotrader.co.za and download the full Eevee buyer survey. And I thank you for your attention, and thank you to NAMSA and Misa Frankfurt for putting this on at a really difficult time. We've all had to change and adapt to talking to each other in this type of fashion. If you want to contact me personally, I'm on all social media networks. And